Last Friday, the 14th of October, this happened.
Security!
That was the sound of Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland, two activists from the group Just Stop Oil, throwing a can of tomato soup over Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers in the National Gallery in London. It was one of a number of climate emergency protests involving art to have gained huge attention across the world in recent months. In May, a man attacked the Mona Lisa with cake, and in July, activists from the group Ultima Generazione glued themselves to the glass of Botticelli's Primavera at the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. I spoke to Emma Brown, the spokeswoman for Just Stop Oil, about the protest and its aims. Emma, can you first say what the goal is of the Just Stop Oil protests?
Yeah, so as a campaign, we have one demand, which is really simple, and it's that the UK immediately stops any new licensing consents for any more drilling or exploration for oil and gas in the North Sea. So we're not asking to turn the tap off overnight. We're asking that we don't explore for new oil and gas fields, because at this point in time, in 2022, it's just madness.
And in terms of the atmosphere around that, obviously there was a rather absurd list that was listed as a anti-growth coalition, as it's called by the Truss government, and it included Extinction Rebellion, for instance. So do you feel that the campaign is therefore more urgent, and is that informing your actions to a certain degree?
What's informing our actions is the dramatically escalating climate catastrophe that we are starting to see even in the UK now. We're in the middle of a drought, which is probably going to affect crops next year. We reach 40-degree temperatures here. So as well as it being, we can kind of talk about the politics of the ridiculous government that we currently have. But what's more urgent, I think, is how urgent the climate catastrophe is, and that we are still not seeing the required urgency from our government. In fact, we're seeing the complete opposite. They're actually looking to license over 100 new oil and gas fields this autumn, which is completely incompatible with any kind of climate action. And we don't know what else to do at this point than to take direct action. It really is our last hope as people.
And when did you start thinking that art was a sort of convenient vehicle for that direct action?
So we started targeting artworks back in the summer. They have been surprisingly valuable to us as a campaign, I think, because of the value that we place on artworks as a society and the kind of touchiness of our sensibilities towards these precious objects. They've acted as a real vehicle for the kind of outrage. And I think a lot of us are not sitting with the reality of what's happening to us. We're in a kind of stage of soft denial where we can know intellectually what's happening, but we're not really feeling it. And if you do feel it, if you do see it, if you actually empathise with the people across the global south that are suffering with starvation, if you actually empathise with the 20-year-olds that are worried that we're going to run out of drinking water before they're 40 years old, then a bit of soup thrown at a painting just completely bears into insignificance. So I think it's really demonstrated that cognitive dissonance that I think many of us are in the West especially.
Before we start talking specifically about the soup and the sunflowers, I wanted to talk about the gluing actions, because it seems to me there's something of a difference in that kind of action to what happened last week. The gluing actions, you didn't directly target the surface of the pictures to the same extent. It was usually the frame or around the picture or the plinth, for instance. Can you say something about those first? So, why glue for a start, and also what you intended to do through that?
A friend of mine has got a documentary out at the moment called Finite, which is about the protest movements that happened around the coal fields in Germany and in the UK. And super glue, lock-ons, these are all devices that protesters have used for years and years. Super glue is just another convenient version of a lock-on. It means that you cannot be removed as quickly. That's the purpose of gluing. That's the purpose of locking on. And so I think what's interesting is the fact that we have been gluing ourselves and locking ourselves onto oil terminals. People have been tying themselves to trees to try and stop old growth forests being destroyed. But what we're seeing now and what we're doing now is we're taking those protests into cities, into institutions, onto public roads. and using those same tactics, but confronting the society with those tactics. And I think I haven't thought about it specifically in terms of the surface and the edge of the painting. I think really what both of those things have in common is we're not actually damaging the artwork itself now. But for me, what's interesting about the gluing on and that is that we're taking those forms of protest from somewhere which was easy to ignore, from somewhere that was distant, and taking them into the city, because the fact is that we can't waste our time anymore just trying to defend against these new disastrous projects. We need to stop those decisions being made, because also we're tired. It's so tiring locking on and being in an oil terminal for 60 hours and trying to defend it with your body, the last breath of your body. You know what I mean? That is so tiring. What we need to do is stop the system that is allowing this to happen. And that's why we're using those tactics, but bringing them in to spaces that are public facing now, because we need everyone.
What's interesting, I think, in terms of the response to the action last week is that there's obviously a huge scope of reactions to it. Some are absolutely supportive, some are partially supportive, some questioning the means. Famously, Andrew Marr, the political journalist, said that you'd lost him forever. One of the things that some people are saying is, I supported the glue protests, but this is going too far. How do you react to that?
I think we've really, really, really let our young people down, really let them down. I think we're ignoring people suffering in the global south. We're ignoring the fact that millions of people are displaced. We've donated from the UK £800,000, which is 2 pence per displaced person. I think that all of those people that are saying, I don't agree with protesting in that particular way, please protest in any way that you see fit. But I don't see people protesting. I don't see people out on the street. And how bad does it have to get before we get to a stage where we are protesting out in the street? Because really, if we were to do a protest that offended nobody, we would just be sitting on a piece of grass with a blank placard and it would be doing nothing. I think even if we were to do a clever protest, all that happens is that people go, oh yeah, that's pretty clever. Oh yeah. I mean, this is not just our cause. This is your cause, Ben. This is everyone's cause. And we also need to, especially on the left, we need to have a level of solidarity. These young women are 20 and 21 years old. How dare you? We need to be having solidarity with those young people. So what if it's a bit crass? What does that matter? It's not as if they hadn't done that action, that the news story would have been replaced with a really serious news story about climate change. It wouldn't. It would have been replaced with some other nonsense that Liz Truss is doing, or some celebrity story or something else. Because the fact of the matter is, it's just not getting through. And that's also our responsibility as adults, all of us. It's not only our responsibility as a small number of people that are doing these direct actions, it's our responsibility as a society. And so if you don't agree with that particular protest, I would say to everyone, do something.
And of course, the idea of this is not, you stated it's about drawing attention to the subject. It is not a personal attack on Van Gogh. But I think one of the things that people are feeling, some people are feeling, is that they do have a deep emotional connection. Vincent van Gogh they've internalised him. He's become part of their sort of cultural makeup, and they see him as an ally to you, and they see themselves as an ally to you, and this has thrown them a bit. I suppose I'm trying to establish why people have reacted so emotionally. Were you concerned at all about alienating people in that sense, that actually potential allies have been disenfranchised to a certain degree, even if they may actually be climate protesters in other ways, not necessarily with your organisation?
So I studied sculpture and environmental art myself, which is about art within and outside of a gallery setting. And it's about art as a social vehicle, a vehicle for social change as well. And I think we've got siloed quite a bit into our individual specialisms. And I think that's been to a detriment. And that's one of the reasons why we're in this position, because scientists are siloed into science. Politicians are the ones that have all the power and the money. They've got the biggest silo, but they don't have any of the knowledge and the experience that would allow them to make better decisions. But artists as well have been professionalised and siloed as well, because we are a lot more than that as artists. Artists throughout history have been hugely involved with movements for social change and justice. And I think obviously these paintings are incredibly valuable as well, but Van Gogh prioritised the nature and life over representations. And he also died penniless. You know, our society completely devalued him. It's only now that he's dead that we have these amazing images. And I totally agree, these images are amazing and beautiful. But I don't see how one protest is going to put people off. You know, the Andrew Marr comment I found ridiculous. I mean, we've also had Noam Chomsky come and support us, and I don't know if you've seen the interview with Andrew Marr and Noam Chomsky, but unfortunately he really called him out because Andrew Marr is a figure of the establishment, basically, and I don't see how you could be like, well, these activists, I didn't like their particular protest, so I would now like to die of devastating climate change and for my children to perish in a flood or die of starvation. It's a ridiculous argument. I don't think it will put activists off acting from whatever movement they're in, whatever kind of change they're trying to create. What I would really hope is that it does cause some discomfort in the sensibilities of the general public. Because I think what got me involved personally, and I think this is something that things that upset us can later on lead us into another direction. So I went to a talk, one of the talks that Just Stop Oil do and Extinction Rebellion do, where they really tell you the cold, hard truth of the situation that we're in. And there was one point in the talk where the speaker was being quite upsetting, actually, talking to us and saying, you guys talk about caring about, you know, Black Lives Matter, for example. I'm mixed race myself. Or you guys talk about, you know, caring about social issues, etc. But you're willing to just sit back and watch billions of people become displaced in India, Pakistan and Africa. And that really struck me. And I actually swore at him because I was really offended by that. But it made me really think. And I thought, yes, these are the values that I really think that I have as a person. But by ignoring this huge catastrophe, this reality, I am sitting by, you know, and allowing that to happen. And that's not the person that I see myself as. And I think that's why we're getting so upset, because we're being upset and we're being challenged. And it's not saying that I've got all the answers or that Just Stop Oil has all the answers. Not saying that at all. But we are saying that there is something wrong in society where we are more upset and shocked about this than about millions, potentially billions of people dying, whole areas becoming completely uninhabitable. This is not in the distant future. This is in like the next 10 years, 20 years. So I think that what we really need to do as a society is be shook up. And I think that social change is not going to happen without discomfort and without agitation. And we're a non-violent movement. That's so important. But discomfort and agitation and tension is going to be important for any social change. It's not going to happen so super smoothly, is it?
Tell me about the lengths that you go to, because is it right you talk to conservators before you take these actions on artworks so that you know the conditions that they are in, and therefore you know, for instance, they are glazed, or that were you to stick to a frame then it wouldn't damage it hugely? Tell me about that.
Well, I don't know if it's as advanced as that. Like, you can just go and have a look and you can see that it's covered in a layer of perspex.
Okay, fine. That's what I thought. I had read that conservators were consulted.
But it's not as much as like conservators are consulted. It's like we have a huge variety of people who are supporters of Just Stop Oil, and some of them are conservators. You know, they actually support the action because they're also active and they're also extremely worried about climate change. So we would consult with those kinds of people. Mm-hmm.
Right, okay. I wanted to talk to you about the broader nature of climate protests in museums, because one of the interesting things is that there were comments from Chris Garrard, who's from Culture Unstained, which has done great work in terms of highlighting fossil fuel sponsorship in museums and campaigning against them. They too have staged very eye-catching protests in museums, etc. They too have got front page news from those protests. On the one hand, he wanted to emphasise that he supported the bravery of Just Stop Oil, but he said this, and I just want to read it back to you. He said, in the past, creative protests at the National Gallery took on its sponsorship by Shell successfully and showed solidarity with the PCS union workers striking when their jobs were being privatised. And then he isolates solidarity is key to how we build the movement. And then he says, protests are by definition disruptive, but who is it you are targeting here? Who does this create pressure for? How will this impact or create pressure for front of house workers, your potential allies? I'm interested in this idea of solidarity particularly, and about solidarity in the protest movement with other organisations. Do you think it makes it more difficult for other organisations now, as well as yourselves, to be able to stage any further protests in museums and galleries as a result of this? Are museums and galleries going to be more on edge and more restrictive of potential protests, do you think?
Potentially, there could be an effect where people are searched for cans of soup or other things going into galleries and art spaces. But again, this is something I often hear quite a lot from people that aren't working class, speaking for working class people, about these effects of like cleaning some soup off some glass. I'm just going to say again, I've got students that I know that went to Glasgow School of Art that have been to prison for protesting, for blockading oil terminals, for protesting at Kelvin Grove, for standing outside an oil depot with a sign. These people are 17, 18, 19 years old. I think we need to just get a grip, to be honest. The way that we have to go to get any kind of future at all, any kind of future, just in terms of having food to eat, water, not devastating heat waves that are going to kill millions upon millions of people every year. The way we have to go, the social shift that we have to undertake is rapid and it's so huge. And we have such little time that I really can't worry about, that people were complaining about the milk protests as well, like crying over spilt milk. Like the way that we have to go, we can't spend decades trying to convince people just with rational argument, because the rational argument, of course, would be we immediately halt all new fossil fuel projects. Everyone agrees with that. What we're doing is trying to put pressure on. It's trying to put pressure on the government. This is only one action. Obviously, you've seen the one at Dartford Bridge.
Yeah.
Hugely disruptive, hugely eye-catching. We know that they were having Cobra meetings about us every single day when we were blockading the oil terminals, and they'll be having the same now. It's putting pressure on them, and it's putting them in a difficult position because they have to decide whether they're going to basically lock up peaceful protesters or whether they're going to do the thing that they should have done back in 2021, which is stop licensing new oil and gas projects. And that is the pressure that we're putting on. We're embarrassing them. We're causing disruption. It's like when you see the strikes happening, they cause disruption. They cause disruption because that is the only thing that works. So that is what we're doing. And there's obviously smaller actions that we're doing, like the actions at the art galleries, which only require a few people, but are hugely attention-grabbing and hugely debate-provoking. But that's only one part of the whole picture of actions that we're doing. And they're all designed to put pressure on the government and also to try and get the climate emergency to the top of the agenda, to the top of people's minds. Because if you stand at the side of the street, people don't listen to you. If you stand in the street, people listen to you. That is how it works. We've kind of forgotten our history a bit, because that's the way it's always worked.
Okay, well, Emma, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you.